Hi, Michael.
Hi.
The question we have for today is, what would be the best way to deal with the feelings of still wanting to be the doer in one's daily life when decisions we consider important have to be made?
There are two things here. One is still wanting, and the other is about the doer. So long as there is ego, to a greater or lesser extent, it will want this or that. All our desires in their seed form are what are called Vishaya Vasanas, and they are the very nature of ego. That is, as ego, we, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, ego is a formless phantom that comes into existence grasping form. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. So that means grasping is the nature of ego, and what it grasps are forms. Since it itself is formless, all forms are things other than itself. The first form it grasps is a body, which it takes to be itself. And then through the five senses of that body, it projects a world which is full of names and forms. So because this grasping, the word Bhagavan uses in that verse for grasping is patru. Patru is a verb that means to grasp or cling to or be attached to. The Tamil word for attachment is patru as a noun. So attachment, it comes out of desire. That is, so long as we, as ego, we desire to live. That is, ego desires its own survival generally until it becomes ready to surrender itself. So, and it survives only by clinging to other things. So it has desires for other things. That is why Vishaya Vasanas are the very nature of ego. And in order to eradicate ego, we need to weaken our Vishaya Vasanas to a considerable extent. That is, we cannot get rid of Vishaya Vasanas entirely without getting rid of their root, which namely ego. But in order to get rid of the root, we first need to greatly weaken the Vishaya Vasanas, because Vishaya Vasanas are what drive our mind to go outwards. So if our Vishaya Vasanas are strong, we'll be unwilling to let go of everything else and turn within and surrender ourselves completely. So in order to be willing to turn within and surrender, we need to be willing to let go of things. And for that, our love to be as we are has to be stronger than our liking to be aware of other things. So how do we deal with still wanting anything? Is by this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. That is, whatever problem we may talk about, the solution to all problems comes down back to that is the only complete solution and the best solution. Best in the sense that it's the quickest solution, is this practice of self-attentiveness, turning our attention within to see what we actually are. So that's the way to deal with any sort of wanting. Regarding the doer, doership is the very nature of ego, because ego first, when ego comes into existence, it grasps the form of the body as itself. Body here means, as Bhagavan clarified in verse 5 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, body is a form of 5 sheaths. The 5 sheaths are the physical form of the body, the life that animates that body, and the mind, intellect, and will that seem to operate within that body. That is, the physical form is the grossest, and there's each of the other 4 are successively more subtle. That is, life is something more subtle than the body. Mind is more subtle than the life. Intellect is more subtle than the mind. Mind there, in that context, mind means the grosser functions of the mind. perceiving, remembering, emotions, all these, the grosser functions of the mind. They are what are called mind in this context. Subtler than that is the intellect, which is the judging and the ability to distinguish things and to see things clearly. See things clearly means to clearly distinguish, for example, right from wrong, real from unreal, etc. And subtler than the intellect is the will. The will consists of the Vishaya Vasanas. So the Vishaya Vasanas are the subtlest of all the sheaves. The Vishaya Vasanas, sometimes the will is referred to as the Karana Sarira, the causal body, because the Vishaya Vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else. They first manifest in the form of likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on, and then in the form of grosser thoughts, and ultimately in the form of the whole world. So, as ego, though we can distinguish these 5 sheaves or 5 layers, so to speak, actually the dividing line between them is often not very clear. That is, we can understand the distinction between intellect and grosser functions of the mind, but where exactly do we draw the line? That is, there's a certain, they're so closely linked, but it's we can, though we understand that, though we can see there's a distinction between them, there's not a clear dividing line between them. That is, the will influences the intellect influences the mind influences the prana, the life, and the body. So they're all very closely interconnected, and we never experience one without experiencing all 5 of them. So ego experiences all these 5 sheaves as I. So any actions done by body, speech, or mind, speech is what? Speech is, physically, it's an action done by the body, but it's an expression of the thoughts in the mind. So speech is somewhere between, the function of speech is an overlap between the physical form of the body and the mind. So all actions of body, speech, and mind are experienced by us as actions done by me, because this body and mind are experienced by us as ourselves. So inevitably, when we rise as ego, we experience doership, that the actions are done by these 3 instruments, body, speech, and mind. Since these 3 instruments are experienced by us as ourselves, we experience that these actions are done by me. That's all there is to doership. So doership is the very nature of ego. But the more we investigate ourselves and thereby bring about the subsidence of ego, the less strong the sense of doership will be, but easier it will be for us to accept. But what is happening is all happening according to the divine will. And the more we are willing to accept that everything is happening according to the divine will and is therefore beneficial for us, the less our own, we will feel a need to interfere with our own will. That is, we will accept the will of God, as Bhagavan says in one verse in Aruṇācala Padigam, in the 2nd verse of Aruṇācala Padigam, Ninishtam enishtam, your will is my will. So the more we are willing to accept whatever happens as the will of God, the less scope there will be for our will. So that is the path of surrender. That is surrendering our will to the will of God, which is or at least at the early stage or a preliminary stage of the path of surrender. The surrender becomes complete only when we surrender the one who has a will, in other words, ego. And that can be brought about only by self-investigation. So we inevitably have the doership so long as we rise as ego. Whether we want to have this doership or not, it's there. It's just the nature of ego. So this question is, what would be the best way to deal with the feeling of still wanting to be the doer in one's daily life when decisions we consider important have to be made? Right. Well, it seems to us that decisions we make determine what happens in our life. But actually, it is not the case. Whatever is to happen is happening according to the divine will. If we decide something and that is not according to the divine will, in other words, divine will is expressed in the form of our prarabdha, our destiny. So if we decide something that is not in accordance with our destiny, it's not going to happen. Though we've decided it, though we may try for it, it's not going to happen. If it happens, that is because it's destined to happen. So it's not because of our decisions, but things happen as they happen. It's because that is what is destined. So it may seem to us, or I decided I want to have a career as in such and such a field, as an engineer or as a doctor or as an art historian or something. We think I decided that, and therefore I had such and such a career. We have such and such a career because it's our destiny. It just so happens that what we wanted to experience, what the career we wanted to have is the career we're destined to have. There are some people who very much would like to be a doctor or an engineer or some particular profession, but circumstances are such they're not able to become that. So whatever happens is according to destiny. Our decisions, though they seem to us very important, they don't matter at all, because either our decisions are in accordance with destiny or they're not in accordance with destiny. If they're in accordance with destiny, it's going to happen anyway, whether we have decided it or not. And if it's not in accordance with destiny, it's not going to happen. So our decisions really don't matter. However, so long as we've still got a strong sense of doership, our decisions seem to be very important. And so we agonize, should I do this or should I do that? And we want things to go in a certain way, so we decide according to our desires. But sometimes it seems, I decided this and it happened. So I've got a strong willpower, we may think. It's nothing to do with our willpower. It just so happened that on that occasion, our will happened to be in accordance with our destiny. We can want anything we want, but it's not going to happen unless it's our destiny for it to happen. We can want it and we can try to achieve it, but however much we try, it's not going to happen if it's not destined to happen. So the reason Bhagavan taught us that whatever we are to experience in this life, or in other words, whatever is to happen to us, is according to destiny, and nothing we may want or try and do is going to change that. That is to help us lose interest in these external things. That is, it's going to happen anyway according to destiny. There's nothing I can do to change it. So why should I be bothered about it? Let things go on as they're meant to go on. And why is it destined? Who has selected the fruits of these particular fruits of past karmas for me to experience? It is only Bhagavan, its own God or Guru or whatever we call it. And he is doing so for our own good. So we should be willing to accept it. So if such is our attitude, in other words, if we're going deep in following Bhagavan's path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we will lose the idea that it's important for us to make this decision or that decision. But so long as we've still got strong desires for things to go in a certain way in our life, we think our decisions are important and we're not willing to give up that right of making decisions. Yes, we've got all the right in the world to make decisions. We can make whatever decisions we want, but it's not going to change anything. Only what is destined to happen is going to happen, and what is not destined to happen is not going to happen, whatever we may decide. So if our decisions, if it seems to us that our decisions bring about certain results, it's just because in that particular case, our decisions happen to be in tune with what is destined to happen. So one of the ways of giving up this idea, but we have this desire to make decisions and be the one who decides what happens in our life. If we understand everything is according to destiny and that our decisions don't make any difference, that is, some of it doesn't mean we should try to avoid making decisions, because sometimes if a certain thing is destined, it may be necessary for us to make a decision, and we'll be made to make those decisions. But we should try to avoid acting according to our will. Just let things happen. Let the body and mind do whatever they're destined to do. Why should we, with our little will, interfere in these things? So we try and we try and withdraw our interest from any of these, from anything that happens externally. Let the external life, let life go on as it's destined to happen. Why should it concern us? Our only concern should be to turn within and thereby to surrender ourselves. Does that adequately answer this question?
Yeah, I hope so. Yes, and I want to ask you several things.
Yes.
Regarding that. For example, you said that when our love to turn within and be as we really are is stronger than our tendency to go outwards, then there will be like will we notice like a critical point where our love grows exponentially and our practice will be
when we reach that critical point, we will turn within the full 180 degrees, and thereby we as ego will cease to exist. And what will then remain is what we actually are.
Yes, so that critical point is actually the actual eradication.
Yes,
final.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we surrender ourselves only when we are willing to surrender ourselves. And in order to be willing to surrender ourselves, our love to be must be greater than our love to do or to experience anything.
Because now it happens that it seems to happen like at times. At times it seems the love seems to be stronger, but it changes or not so strong as we think, and not enough, not strong enough.
Changeability is the very nature of mind. So it will continue seemingly change, that is increasing and decreasing, but that fluctuations will be there until the final moment of surrender, when we turn the full 180 degrees to face ourselves alone. Then all this fluctuation will come to an end. Until then, the very nature of mind, waxing and waning, is the very nature of mind. Mind appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. And while it appears, it undergoes, moment to moment, it's undergoing change. But there's one element of the mind that never undergoes change. That is the I, that is thinking all these different thoughts, and that is sometimes having liking to turn within and sometimes having less liking to turn within. That the I itself remains unchanged. The only change that I, the ego, namely ego, undergoes is the change in its its rising and subsiding. Once it's risen, it's the same I. Its desires change, its everything changes, but all the objects change, the subject remains the same.
If I were to choose a word to describe the mind, that would be unstable.
Yes.
It's our experience.
The analogy that is often given for mind is the moon. The moon is constantly changing. Not only is it waxing and waning, but in no 2 days will you find the moon rising and following the same pattern. It's always, the passage of the moon through the sky is constantly changing. Some days it'll rise here, some days it'll rise here. The passage of the moon is always changing. So it's a very good analogy for the nature of the mind. From moment to moment, it's changing.
Exactly. I also heard comparisons.
But we don't have to worry about that.
Bad weather. Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that. Why? If we were this mind, then we'd have to worry about its changeability. But are we this mind? We need to step back, just be that which is, be what we actually are, be that which is unchanging. In other words, that fundamental awareness I am, that is what we actually are. That is ever untouched by this ever-changing mind. The problem arises when we identify ourselves with this mind.
Yes, and one thing regarding the 5 sheets, when you say gross as grosser, more subtle, and about the 5 sheets, for example, does that mean that, I think I remember hearing you say that the subtler it is, the more powerful, or it has more power.
Yes,
over the other sheets. So does that mean, for example, would that mean, for example, that in practice, for example, if I have an addiction or I'm hooked on sugar or eating meat or sugar, for example, and I know it's not good for my health, but my intellect tells me it's not good, very good for my health, but I can help but eating sugar each time that I come across. So is that because
the will is more powerful?
The
will is more powerful than the intellect.
Exactly. Or I know I have to go to the gym. I have to exercise because I'm fat or whatever. But the intellect is very weak compared to the will. Yeah. Yeah.
But if the intellect is very clear, if you really understand sugar is bad for you, then you're not going to want what is bad for you. It's sometimes we allow our will to cloud our intellect. That is how the will has dominion over the intellect.
And that's why it doesn't work the opposite way. I mean, I cannot do anything with my body to improve my intellect, for example.
No.
Anything I do with my body is just it's a grosser function. It's a grosser thing.
And that is, of all these 5 sheets, the subtlest is the will. But subtler than that is ego. Ego is the subtlest of all, because all these are forms. Ego, as Bhagavan says, is a formless phantom. So it is the subtlest of all.
And when you said that our decisions don't matter in the end, and at the end of the day, but
the decisions you make now may lead you to do certain actions, and but making a decision is itself an action. It's an action of the mind. People often take decisions to be the will, but decisions, we decide things according to our will. So it's the vasanas that prompt us to make certain decisions. So the making of decisions is the mind being influenced by the will. So that is a karma. Making a decision is a karma, and acting on that decision is a still grosser karma. Those karmas are what are called agamya. The actions that we do according to our will are agamya. They won't change anything that we are destined to experience in this lifetime, but they do create fruit that gets stored in sanchita and may at some point in future be experienced by us as prarabdha. But whatever we decide or whatever we do in this lifetime will not change what we are to experience in this lifetime. What we are to experience has already been predetermined. So in that sense, making decisions is useless. In another sense, making decisions is just creating fresh trouble for the future, because the more fruit, whether good fruit or bad fruit, we may make a very good decision, very noble decision. I want to dedicate my life to serving the poor or something. But what can we do if we happen to be poor ourselves? There's nothing we can do to, our ability to serve other poor people, it becomes very limited. So we cannot. We may have good intention, but not always able to carry out our intention. But that is all creating fruit for the future. Whether good fruit or bad fruit, they're all the fruits of good actions are golden chains. The fruits of bad actions are iron chains, but chains are chains. So we want to go beyond the chains of karma. And in order to do that, we need to cut up the root. Who is the doer? Who is the experiencer? That is only ego. That is what we need to investigate. Who am I?
Yeah, and I guess it's inevitable as an ego. I don't know, but to not trust fully the karma theory, or I don't know if it's if we can, as still being an ego, reduce the importance to the seeming events of our life that happen based on our decisions, or to fully let go, or to a great extent, those decisions, those events that are going to happen, or if it's being an ego, it's also it's inevitable that the same as Vishaya Vasanas are going to remain with us until we eradicate the
Vishaya Vasanas are not inevitable. The Vishaya Vasanas that we have now are ones that we've cultivated in the past. We who have cultivated these Vishaya Vasanas can also begin to undo them. That is, we can weaken our outward going vasanas. That is what this practice, any spiritual practice, not only self-investigation and self-surrender, even other forms of spiritual practice, any spiritual practice is beneficial to the extent to which it purifies the mind. What are the impurities in the mind? The Vishaya Vasanas. So if, for example, you are a devotee of a God in name and form, all your puja, japa, and dhyana, what is the purpose of all this puja, japa, and dhyana? It is only to focus your mind more and more on God. When you're focusing your mind on God, you're withdrawing it from other things. So the more your love for God increases, the more your inclination to go out after other things will decrease. So that's
I lost you for, sorry, Michael, I lost you for like 20 seconds or something like that.
Okay,
yeah?
Sorry. What I'm saying is, that is, supposing you're doing you're practicing, you're a devotee, you're following the path of bhakti. You may be doing puja and japa and dhyana. Puja means you're worshipping a name and form of God. Japa means you're repeating his name. Dhyana means you're meditating either on a name or a form of God. So you may be doing these. What is the purpose of all these actions that the devotee does? It is to focus the mind more and more on God. And by focusing the mind on God, we are thereby withdrawing it from other things. That is, the more we cultivate that love for God, the less we will be concerned about other things. So the less our mind will have an inclination to go out after other things. So this is how the mind is purified by the path of bhakti. Like that, any spiritual path is beneficial only to the extent to which it weakens that outward going tendency of the mind. In other words, our Vishaya Vasanas, our inclination to go outwards to attend to other things. The most effective means to weaken that outward going inclination is self-investigation. Because even in bhakti, so long as you take God to be other than yourself, your attention is still going away from yourself towards another. It may be withdrawn from other Vishayas, other objects, but it's all focused on one object, God. Because so long as you take God to be other than yourself, God becomes an object. But God is not an object, nor is he the subject. He is the reality that underlies the subject. In other words, God is that which is shining within the subject as I am. The real nature of the subject. The subject means ego, the false awareness, I am this body. So, but when that's why Bhagavan says in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, after describing the paths of puja, japa, and dhyana, and saying that each one is successively more, each one is more effective than the previous one, implying more effective in purifying the mind. In verse 8, he says, rather than anya bhava, that means meditating on God as something other than oneself, ananya bhava, in which he is I, and Anya Bhava means meditating on him as not other than I, with the conviction that he is I, that is anatinam uttamam. That is among all, that is the best. So why is it the best? Because it's the most effective means to purify the mind, because we're directly opposing the nature of the mind is to go outwards towards something or other. When we are turning the mind within, we are directly opposing that outward going tendency, and we're cultivating that inclination to go within. So this is the most effective means to purify the mind.
What I meant, maybe I didn't express very well.
Yes.
What I meant is that as long as we are the ego, as we feel ourselves to be the ego, is it possible to relinquish completely the sense? I mean, the fact that things are going to happen according to prarabdha, for example. I mean, we're going to interfere to a minimum extent, at least, with the prarabdha that is going to happen, even though our mind is very purified.
Yes,
or,
that is so long as there's ego, the root of all the impurities in the mind is ego. So the mind is not perfectly pure so long as we rise as ego. The perfectly pure mind is the egoless mind. The egoless mind is not a mind at all. It is only pure awareness. So, so long as there is ego, we still have, to a greater or lesser extent, we still have an inclination to go outwards. And so we still have an inclination to, we're not fully accepting, but everything is going on according to destiny. That is, yes, I accept whatever happens, that is the will of God, and that is what is good for me. But I hope God does this because this is what I want. So we cannot totally avoid having likes and dislikes so long as we rise as ego. If we want to be free of likes and dislikes, the only way is to be free of ego.